In 1629, colonial Virginia marked an extraordinary verdict in sex identities. Thomas, or Thomasine Hall, was British North America's first recorded intersex individual. Further, Jamestown's General Court determined that Hall could rightfully identify as both a man and a woman and express as both gender roles. Their path to becoming a historical figure was not an aspiration, as their journey was led by, as Mary Beth Norton states, the absence of a sense of personal privacy. However, living as a gender nonconforming person in the traditional society of rising colonial America sets the seeds for a fight for fluidity and acceptance that continues today. Historical records use pronouns depending on their presentation as a man or a woman. To encapsulate their entire lived experience, this film will be using they-them pronouns. From records in the Quarter Court Minutes, we know that they were originally born in approximately 1600, though some sources say 1603, in Newcastle upon Tyne in northeastern England. They were raised as a girl named Thomasine by their parents. At the age of 12, Hall's mother, a co-worker named Rolfe Hall, sent them to live in London with their aunt. During these years, Hall continued to be raised as a girl, presumably being taught typical domestic skills of the time, including sewing. In 1625, at around the age of 24, Hall's brother was drafted into the English army in their fight against Spain. Presumably, Hall wanted to join their brother at the time of their draft. Hall cut their hair, wore men's clothing, and enlisted into the army under the name Thomas. United with their brother, they fought in the Cadiz naval expedition, ending in the English defeat. Though sources vary, Hall was estimated to be enlisted around 1 to 3 years. This first record of Thomas, as presented in male roles, was joining a cherished loved one, their brother, in the army. There is no record of Hall's reasoning behind the different stages of gender expression, but their role and work in society was heavily connected to their different gender expressions. Throughout history, gender fluidity has existed in the war for a spectrum of different reasonings, between cisgender women joining for nationalism's sake to gender-neutral individuals. Their acceptance is incredibly varied based on identity and reasoning. Though Hall held no record of specific relationship or cases of harassment throughout their time in war, there's no way to know what they experienced. In modern days of the USA, mass amounts of policies, harassment, and stigmas work against intersex, transgender, and gender nonconforming people in the military. In the vast differences in dialogue over Mulan versus the trans ban in the military, you can continue to see the discrimination and issues of intersectionality with gender presentation in the military today. After the Army, Hall moved to Plymouth, England. During this period, they presented as Thomasine, wearing women's apparel. There, they also worked in and practiced bone lace and needlework. This was traditionally considered women's work, and it's assumed that Hall learned the crafts during their time in London. Around 1628, they took an interest in the migration of working-class English towards the North American colonies. Crossing the Atlantic Ocean, they settled in the British colony of Virginia. This settlement was first established in Jamestown in 1607, the first permanent North American settlement of England. This area would later become a central economy for tobacco and slavery in later years. This also marks Hall's participation in the colonization of indigenous American land. In this journey, Hall cut their hair and presented as Thomas, which they signed a work contract under. They moved to Virginia as an indentured servant, working for John Teos and Robert Ayres. John owned a tobacco plantation. Though arriving in Virginia as male presenting, or Thomas, Hall began to present in women's clothing. They took on labor that was traditionally reserved for women, continuing their work in domestic labor. No record is kept of intention, but it's worthwhile to note that colonial Virginia had a ratio of around 6 workers to each female worker. Both appeals to gender and labor advantages could be at play. Again, at this time of their life, it was generally undocumented, so there's no way to say exactly how people felt about Thomas or Thomasine Hall and their fluidity in presentation. People have been aware of intersex traits since the early records of ancient Greece. However, the gender roles of colonial Virginia and England upheld a strict patriarchal system. John Teos was recorded saying to the community that Thomasine was a woman. A record of colonist Mr. Stacy said he believed Hall was a man and a woman. Others spread rumors of discomfort. At the forefront, rumors that Hall had sex with a maid who worked in a different household brought up questions. If the rumors were true and Hall was a man, this would be a crime of fornication, or voluntary intercourse between two non-married individuals. If Hall was a woman, English common law would not prosecute the act. The new involvement of John Atkins, who wanted to buy Hall's contract, brought even more questions. Community accusations built to an apex, and a group of married women took action. They confronted Hall, demanding to search their body and determine themselves what sex they appeared to be. They utilized English law, which said that women could search the bodies of other women to find evidence for crimes. The group stripped and searched Hall's genitals, and they came to their conclusion that Hall was a male. The issue was brought to a separate plantation owner, who questioned Hall. From the testimony of Thomas or Thomasine Hall, they said they were both a man and a woman, with parts not completely aligned with either. Today, we would now assume that Hall was an intersex individual. The plantation owner ordered Hall to wear women's clothing, but the controversy didn't stop there. Hall was subjected to multiple more genital searches. In 1629, the original group of women conducted a search while Hall was asleep, then called John Atkins to inspect further. After a third inspection, John Atkins and the community decided that Hall must be a man and sought repercussions for their original statement. 2 men later forced an examination on a public road. Sadly, this obsession with identifying others, placing them into binary boxes of sex, has continued throughout generations. In the two-sex model, whiteness pushes male and female expected presentations apart, while the patriarchy holds man higher than woman. Not only are those who don't fit into the gender binary heavily scrutinized, it creates a guise of needing to protect women while also holding them inferior. Under the cover of protecting women, in this case, a maid from consensual sex, the community forced unconsensual genital searches, examining and speculating, calling upon each other to take their own look. This mirrors the fight against transgender people in bathrooms in the modern day, where a Minnesota woman is forced to strip to prove themselves as a cisgendered woman. After all examinations, the community had settled on penalizing Hall for allegedly pretending to be a woman. At some point, these rumors reached Jamestown's leadership. On April 8, 1629, Thomas or Thomasine Hall is brought before the Quarter Court of Virginia. This is the time of the term, quote-unquote, hermaphrodite. Little is scientifically known about intersex traits. Strict patriarchal roles are upheld, and an intersex individual has not been recorded previously. Despite these precedents, Hall comes across as genuine. The court declines to hear the groups of married women's testimonies and declines to do a physical examination. Thomas or Thomasine Hall is ruled as both a man and a woman. Some attribute this exceptional conclusion to the dynamic conditions of colonial law, existing between English common law and their new circumstances, often without the requirements of traditional legal education. Either way, the court required Hall to wear both breeches and a shirt of a man attire, and the cap and apron of female attire. This marked Hall as an other, indicating to their community and any newcomers of the verdict. However, it also respected Hall's experience presenting as both a man and a woman. Hall's testimony was believed without invasive examinations, and they were not prosecuted for fluidity in gender presentation. After the general court hearing, no records exist of Hall, though some assume that they migrated to a new settlement under their chosen identity. This marks Thomas or Thomasine in a dynamic player in the creation of gender roles, particularly Western. Hall was an active part of colonialism, pushing Indigenous out and pushing for the integration of Western expectations of sex. Once there, Hall both resides in the gender roles of colonialism and the breaking of barriers in the fluidity of their expression. In making historical steps in sex and the gender binary, they are also actively a part in the killing and building of systems against the indigenous. However, one of the reasons Hall's story is so surprising isn't because intersex people didn't exist or they were the first to break away from the conformity of binary gender roles. The surprise lies in us being able to hear the story. It must not be forgotten that much of this story is told unconsensually, being forced to express their identity in the court of their community. Hall was not an activist of self-expression, but a piece of the machine that produced the scientific sex. However, this piece and this story goes against generations of systemic boundaries of the sex binary. They are integral in fighting for the acceptance and fluidity of intersex, gender nonconforming, and trans individuals.